Imagine you spent 30 years building the most sophisticated machines in human history. Satellites, fighter jets, electric car batteries, smartphones, the kind of technology that defines a civilization. And then one morning, you wake up and realize that almost every single one of those machines depends on a list of 17 obscure metals. Metals most people have never heard of. Metals with names that sound like rejected Hogwarts spells: neodymium, dysprosium, terbium. And then you realize something worse. You don't control any of them. China does. Not kind of, not partially, not in a, well, it's complicated geopolitical way. China controls roughly 60% of the world's rare earth mining, more than 85% of the world's rare earth processing, and close to 90% of the permanent magnets made from those materials. The magnets that go inside every EV motor, every wind turbine, every missile guidance system on the planet. This didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen by accident. And the West didn't just miss it. In many ways, it helped build it. This is the story of how China quietly won a resource war that most people didn't know was being fought. Let's start with what rare earths actually are, because the name is misleading. They aren't particularly rare. You can find them scattered across the Earth's crust on almost every continent. The problem isn't scarcity. The problem is getting them out of the ground and into a usable form. That process, mining, separating, refining, is extraordinarily difficult, toxic, and expensive. The chemicals involved are harsh. The waste byproducts are radioactive. The infrastructure required is enormous. For most of the 20th century, the United States was actually the global leader in rare earth production. There's a place called Mountain Pass in the California desert, a massive rare earth deposit that for decades was the backbone of the global supply chain. In 1990, the U.S. supplied nearly 100% of the world's rare earth needs. Then, the economics changed. China began mining rare earths aggressively in the 1980s and 90s, flooding the global market at prices that no one else could match. Deng Xiaoping, China's paramount leader at the time, made a remark that has since become legendary among resource economists. He said, roughly translated, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." He wasn't boasting, he was announcing a strategy. And the strategy worked because the West did exactly what market logic told it to do. When Chinese rare earths got cheap enough, American and European companies stopped mining their own. Mountain Pass shut down in 2002. Processing facilities in Europe closed. The expertise quietly walked out the door. Why spend billions maintaining expensive, polluting operations when you could just buy from China at a fraction of the cost? It made perfect short-term sense. Now here's where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable. Rare earths aren't just an input, they're a choke point. A single processed rare earth element, let's say dysprosium, might make up less than 1% of the weight of an electric vehicle motor. But without it, the motor doesn't work at the temperatures required for real-world performance. You can't just swap it out. You can't engineer around it. It's not like steel, where there are dozens of suppliers and substitutes. Think of it like a key. The car might be 99.9% complete, but without that key, it doesn't start. The global EV revolution, the one that every government on Earth is now mandating, the one that hundreds of billions of dollars in public and private investment are riding on, runs on rare earth magnets. The wind farms being built across Europe and the American Midwest, rare earth magnets. The advanced weapon systems the Pentagon is spending record budgets on, the guidance systems, the radar, the targeting hardware, all of it threaded through with rare earth elements almost entirely processed in China. By 2010, China controlled around 97% of global rare earth production. 97%. That's not a supply chain dependency. That's a monopoly with geopolitical teeth. And then China decided to show those teeth. In 2010, a Chinese fishing vessel collided with Japanese Coast Guard ships near disputed islands in the East China Sea. Japan detained the captain. Within weeks, shipments of rare earth materials from China to Japan slowed to a trickle. No official embargo was declared, no formal policy announced, just slowdowns, paperwork delays, customs complications, Japan panicked. Its electronics industry, Sony, Toyota, Honda, Hitachi, ran on Chinese rare earths. The message was received without a single word being spoken officially. The rest of the world watched and quietly updated their threat models. The US, the EU, and Japan filed a formal complaint with the World Trade Organization. They won. China was found to have violated trade rules and eventually walked back some of the restrictions. Prices normalized. And then, predictably, tragically, the urgency faded. Governments went back to the comfortable assumption that the market would sort it out. It didn't sort it out. What China had done between 2010 and 2020 was something far more durable than just controlling the mines. They had built an entire industrial ecosystem around rare earths, separation plants, alloying facilities, magnet manufacturers, the downstream industries that turn raw, rare earth material into the finished components that go into products. China didn't just own the oil field. It owned the refinery, the pipeline, the gas station, and the engine. Let's talk about what it would actually take to compete with that. Mountain Pass in California was purchased out of bankruptcy and relaunched. It's now operated by a company called MP Materials, and it's the only rare earth mine currently operating in the United States. Production has ramped up meaningfully. That's the good news. The bad news is that for most of its recent history, MP Materials was shipping its ore concentrate to, you guessed it, China for processing, because there were no functioning processing facilities in the US capable of handling it at scale. They've since announced plans to build domestic processing capacity. Those plans are expensive, slow, and behind schedule in the way that most industrial infrastructure projects are. To understand the scale of the gap, consider this. China has spent roughly 40 years and an estimated $100 billion or more building its rare earth industrial base. Not just mines, but the chemistry, the engineering expertise, the supply chains, the skilled labor. You cannot replicate that in 5 years with a government grant and good intentions. Australia has significant rare earth deposits. So does Canada. Brazil has some of the largest reserves in the world. There's a massive untapped deposit in Greenland that's been the subject of geopolitical maneuvering for years, including a certain former US president who floated the idea of buying the island outright. That idea was widely mocked. The logic behind it, stripped of the absurdity of the delivery, was not entirely crazy. Because the math is unforgiving. Mining takes years to permit. Processing facilities take years to build. Training a workforce with the relevant chemistry and metallurgy skills takes years. And while all of that is happening, the global economy is accelerating into an era that needs more rare earths, not fewer. Here's the irony that doesn't get talked about enough. The green energy transition, the policy response to climate change, is one of the most rare earth-intensive industrial projects in human history. Wind turbines, EV batteries, solar panel manufacturing equipment, grid-scale storage systems, every one of these technologies runs through the rare earth supply chain. Every government that has set ambitious clean energy targets has often, without fully acknowledging it, increased its strategic dependence on China. The Biden administration passed the Inflation Reduction Act, partly aimed at building domestic clean energy supply chains. The EU launched its Critical Raw Materials Act. There are subsidy programs, defense production orders, and diplomatic efforts to open new supply channels through allies. These are real. They are not nothing. But they are also running against time, against inertia, and against an adversary that has spent decades building exactly the position they are now trying to challenge. China, meanwhile, has moved further. It has passed export control regulations on certain rare earth processing technologies, making it harder for other countries to build the processing infrastructure they need, even if they have the raw materials. It's a sophisticated play. Don't just control the resources, control the knowledge of how to use them. Now, zoom out, because this isn't just a story about minerals. It's a story about how economic efficiency and strategic security are not the same thing. For decades, the operating assumption of Western economic policy was that global trade was a stabilizing force, that deep interdependence would prevent conflict, that comparative advantage would make everyone richer, that the market would allocate resources better than governments could. That framework produced enormous wealth. It also produced rare earth dependency, semiconductor dependency, pharmaceutical ingredient dependency, and 100 other choke points that are now being mapped with some urgency. The rare earth story is the clearest example, but it's not unique. It's the template. A country identifies a strategic resource or manufacturing capability. It subsidizes it heavily in ways that would violate WTO rules if anyone bothered to challenge them vigorously. It drives out foreign competition through low prices. It builds deep downstream industrial capacity. And then, once the dependency is established, it has options. Not necessarily the option of a dramatic embargo, that has costs too, but the option of friction, slowdowns, price leverage, the ability to make any adversary calculate the cost of confrontation a little differently. It's a long game. And the West, structurally, is not very good at long games. So where does this leave us? There are genuine efforts underway to diversify. New mining projects are in development in Africa, Australia, and Canada. Processing partnerships are being built. Defense departments are stockpiling. The private sector is investing in recycling technologies that could eventually recover rare earths from old electronics and reduce virgin mining demand. None of this is fast enough to close the gap in the near term. And the near term is roughly the same window in which the global EV transition, the clean energy build-out, and the next generation of weapon systems will be deployed. China has not won this permanently. Monopolies erode, technologies change, substitutes get discovered. The geopolitical and economic pressure to diversify rare earth supply is now intense in a way it wasn't 10 years ago. But here's the question worth sitting with. What other strategic dependencies are already baked in? Dependencies that haven't yet had their 2010 fishing boat moment. What other industries, what other choke points are already locked in place while the world debates the ones that made the headlines? The rare earth story took 40 years to build. It became visible as a crisis in about 40 days. Most long games look like nothing at all, right up until they don't.